Welcome back to another episode of Phenomenal Conversations with Mr. Short. I have the pleasure to be joined by Shannon Anderson from Shannon is Teaching. She's wrote multiple books. She's an author, speaker. She's also a writing expert that goes into a lot of schools. I think I might have messed up part of that. But at the end of the day, she's is doing a lot in education. So I thought she'd be perfect for this podcast. Shannon, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right, so let's get it started. I always call this my Walking Dead question. How did you get your start in education? What made you decide to become an educator?
Well, when I was in high school, I actually had two younger sisters that were quite a bit younger than me. And, I always played school and I got to be the teacher and they were my students along with some dolls and stuffed animals. But I also have a very young mom and she dropped out of school to have me. And when I was taking high school classes, she decided she wanted to go back and get her GED. And I was able to tutor her through that because I was taking classes, that she needed.
Oh,
And
wow.
just seeing the power of an education and what that made, as a difference in her confidence, but also to be able to get a job. It just really made me decide I wanted to go into education. And so that's what I did.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool right there. Just, hearing people backstories as far as what made them get into education, that's always very cool to hear. So talk about that starting education. I know you kind of mentioned how you, before we were on air, I guess, that you did first grade. So talk about just your career as a classroom teacher.
Sure. I taught first grade for 16 years, and then I was asked to be a literacy coach / writing coach. Writing is my passion. And so I did that. And after 4 years of that, I really started to miss being in the classroom and having my own crew of kids because I was coming into classrooms, K through 5 and modeling lessons and helping teachers and working with kids, but I missed having my own kids. And so there was an opening in third grade and I took it. And so the last 5 years of my teaching were in third grade. I also held different hats. I was the gifted coordinator the last 12 years of my teaching. And I also was teaching at a local college as an adjunct professor, preparing kids who want to become teachers. And so that was a lot of fun. For about 6 years, I got to do that, where I was teaching some of the methods classes for methods of teaching literacy and methods of teaching art, music, and drama as a combined class, which was a lot of fun.
So talk about kind of juggling. I mean, it seems like you still do that. So I guess maybe you already had practice, but juggling all those hats, because it does seem like as teachers, I'll say myself, it was kind of hard. Like I started doing the podcast after a while before the school year, but then when I got thrust into a new role, it just didn't seem like it was enough time doing that plus to, I guess, teach and intervene. It was very difficult. So talk about juggling all of those hats at one time.
They have that saying that if you want something done, to ask the busiest person you know. And I think I'm one of those people that, the busier I am, the better I get at figuring out how to fit it all in and to do it all. Now, that being said, I finally did get to a point after 25 years of teaching where I was starting to write books for kids and I was starting to get some, more than one book coming out a year. And I did finally have to make that decision, am I going to do this really well or this really well? Because I can't really do both really well to my full extent. And so I did make the decision after 25 years to write and speak full time, which I still get to teach. It just takes different forms. I teach at conferences and keynoting at events and going to schools. And, my biggest goal when I'm doing author visits and author assemblies is to inspire kids to see the power in reading and writing. And I also am oftentimes asked, and more so in this year, I've been asked a lot to come for 2 days, one day for the teachers to do all kinds of PD, and then another day for the kids, so that I'm not just delivering an assembly with everyone, and seeing the author visit part, and they get to see the story behind the stories and all of that, but to actually get to go into classrooms and write with them. So we'll write something, like poetry, something that we can finish a whole piece in a short amount of time, but to just have fun with words and to play with them and to see that writing takes so many different forms.
So I guess you kind of gave me a perfect segue. I guess that was literally the next question I had on here. What made you kind of want to write a book? Is it something that you always wanted to do, or is it just kind of came about after years of teaching?
My high school job was working in the public library, and our public library had two stories. The upstairs was all of the adult stuff, and the downstairs was the children's area. And I was fortunate enough to get a job in the children's section. And so the children's librarian would leave every day at 4, and I would come in after school and work from 4 to 8 when they closed. And I loved having that job because, for one, I always loved kids' books when I was a kid, but then it kind of reintroduced me to these wonderful, magical books. And I loved being the first to get to read them before they even went out into circulation. I loved it when families would come and the parents would go upstairs and just send their kids down to me. And I would get to match them to a book I thought they would enjoy. Or if we weren't really busy, I could actually sit and read with them. And it was just wonderful. And so my senior year in high school, I had a scrapbook. And in there, I wrote that I was going to be an elementary teacher and eventually write children's books. And I'm happy to say that I've gotten to do both of those.
Oh, say write a vision and make it plain. So, so just looking at some of the titles of some of the characters, I mean, as a teacher, it kind of, I could tell that a teacher wrote these because it seems like you find problem solution, just even with some of the titles, just a few of them. I think one of them, of course, celebrating Valentine's Day, but Too Shy to Say Hi, Wise for Yet, and then Coasting Casey, and then Penelope Perfect. A lot of it, and then even Vulture and the Hummingbird, all of them seems like it, even looking at the title, and of course, as teachers, we teach kids to make a prediction. You can kind of tell that the story is going to have a clear problem solution. So did you have that in mind when you wrote these books? And also, I guess the second part of the question is, what were some of your inspiration for the characters?
For sure. Yeah, you're right on the money. A lot of my books were inspired by real life experiences, whether it was in my home or in my classroom. My very first book was I'm Not a Pirate, and it was about my youngest daughter, Maddie, who had to wear an eye patch for 3 years. And she didn't like being called Little Pirate when she was wearing that. She had to wear it to correct her vision and strengthen her other eye. And so, of course, that was inspired by, her going through that. I wanted to show how she got through it with a sense of humor. But then, yeah, the other ones, a lot of my topics at this point in time, I've got 15 books out, and a lot of them are based on things that I feel like could be used by parents or by teachers that can launch conversations about things that I see as relevant issues. Like, for example, I have 3 books on growth mindset. Why is Forget is for the youngest kids. It's an alphabet book that I was able to use the vehicle of the alphabet to tell 26 different things about growth mindset. The R is for resilience. And then I have an older one, Mindset Power, is a middle grade. And then my newest one coming out on growth mindset is Yay, you failed. And it's about celebrating mistakes and learning from them and seeing the power in, like making mistakes means you tried. And so that's okay. And that's a good thing to celebrate. And some of the other titles, like Coasting Casey, you mentioned, it's about an underachiever. He's very gifted in music and art and anything that has to do with creativity, but isn't as interested in some of isn't as interested in some of the academics. And then Penelope Perfect is based on a student I had that was such a perfectionist. She would be in tears if she misspelled one word or missed one math problem. And, I want to show that it's good to strive for excellence, of course, but not to the point of giving yourself anxiety, because, well, if you're trying to be perfect, you're running a race without a finish line. So, I want to be able to share stories that are not, too didactic in nature, but they also still let teachers have conversations with kids by seeing some of these issues in the characters and not having to point it out into the students themselves. So Too Shy to Say Hi, especially when I taught first grade, I had a lot of kids that dealt with social anxiety. And so it's just kind of how to take those small, brave steps. And my newest book that's just coming out is I Love Strawberries. And that's really the theme of that one is determination. This girl is determined to prove that she's responsible enough to grow her own strawberry patch. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of those are just that. They're hopefully potential conversation starters and hopefully enjoyable too.
Well, I mean, even as I hear you kind of describe it, I was like, wow, I bet she got a 5 when it came to knowledge of students on her evaluations. It seems like you probably seems like you definitely know your students, because honestly, just listen at the one coasting Casey. So I mean, I kind of was that student, like as I kind of got a little farther in school, maybe not in early grade. So stuff like that kind of, I relate to it a lot because I was that type of student. I was the one that was kind of coasting, so I relate to stories like that. So it's part of my whole little narrative now. So I kind of appreciate you writing a story like that because there's a lot of students I have that they kind of have the same mentality and you just don't know what really to say to them because I know one thing you don't want to run the danger of is kind of seeing too much of yourself in that student. So it'd be good to have a book where they kind of can read about that and the good and bad of that. So thank you for writing a book like that. So one of the other things I wanted to touch on with the books, it seems like you're very intentional with the titles. So why did you choose to give some of those books the titles that you did?
Titles are so hard. You want something that is going to let the reader know a little taste of what it's about. And of course, for the marketability of it, you don't want to just have something that's vague, because then, if someone's really looking for something intentionally with a certain purpose in mind or a certain theme in mind, they might not know. And I like to just have fun with titles too, like "Yay, you failed" is going to be, kind of that shock value, like, wait, what do you
That's
mean?
Like, I don't know too many
failed?
kids
How
gonna
is
pick that
that?
up.
Yeah, and then some of them are alliterated titles like Penelope Perfect, Hosting Casey, Too Shy to Say Hi. I've got some rhyming in there. So, and sometimes you create a title and then the editor has other suggestions, and sometimes they come up with something that's much better. So you just kind of stay open to that, so that it can be the best fit for the book.
All right, so let's get into, I guess, those author visits. You kind of said a whole bunch of questions. I can tell you probably do this a lot. So those author visits to school, just talk about the power of those and being able to visit schools and talk to kids about books.
That is definitely my favorite thing out of all of the process of creating the books themselves. Of course, that's a lot of fun and I enjoy that, but the best part is connecting with those readers that are going to read the book ultimately. And so I enjoy getting to come to schools and just sharing little tidbits. Sometimes we call them the Easter eggs that are hidden in the stories. So for example, like Too Shy to Say Hi, there's a parrot in the story, and the editor actually asked me to provide a picture of our own parrot that we have to model for the illustrator. So just little things like that the kids wouldn't know unless they got to meet the author and they talked about it. The I Love Strawberry story, there's a backstory there that I feel like is inspiring to people to never give up, because that story I wrote and took with me to the very first children's book writing conference I ever went to 10 years ago. And it won first place in the contest. So I knew it wasn't like terrible, but I could not get it published. I kept sending it to publishers, and for one reason or another, it would be a no thank you, a rejection. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago that that someone said, yes, we want to make that into a book. And so sharing those types of stories to never give up, because it's a variety of reasons that maybe someone tells you no thank you, or the time just isn't right yet, but we have to keep going. And in that case, it was something where I had to set that aside and keep working on other things and keep creating, and knowing that its time would come if it was meant to be. And so just sharing those types of things, and just even by sharing what Penelope Perfect is about, or what Coasting Casey is about, or what growth mindset is, they're lessons in themselves. So I feel like I still get to teach in a big way when I'm doing my author assemblies, and then get to actually write with them if the whoever invited me to the school has me come in and do some writing with the kids.
Awesome. So that goes into my next question. I wanted to ask about, so in addition to author visits, you do writing sessions and you speak, and you've already kind of talked about how to juggle things when you were a teacher. How are you able to juggle all those things? Because it seems like that's all are kind of different things. So how is it you're able to juggle all those? And looking at your schedule, it seems like you're busy doing them all. It seems like you do them within a week. So how are you able to juggle all those different, I guess, responsibilities?
Well, to me, it's all interrelated, because, I love writing. And so the things that I used in my classroom and the techniques I use to write my books are things that I love being able to share with teachers. Because if we can make an experience for kids, whether you're teaching math or science or reading or writing, if you can make an authentic experience for them where they know what real writers are doing, or in the case of science, like, what is this experiment really for? Like, what is the real world application here? And so if I'm able to share, with teachers how to do that as a real writer myself, I feel like we can make lessons that are more meaningful to kids. And it's not just okay, so now we're going to study narrative, personal narratives this 9 weeks, and then we're going to study letter writing, and then we're going to, instead making that very applicable to how can we do this in our lives, like for letter writing, who could we write to as a real audience, and not just practice, well, this is our greeting and this is the body and this is the closing. Like, let's really write to someone. Or, what really could we persuade someone with in an opinion writing or a persuasive writing? Like, let's take on an actual project and try to persuade someone to do something in the community or in our school. Can we change something? That's the point of learning how to do that. So if there are ways that I can share with teachers things that I've done in my classroom for real writing experiences or in my writing career, then they get excited to be able to take that back to their students and share it with them. So I always tell teachers, even if you're not really a writer yourself, come up with a writing notebook and show the kids, this is where I capture ideas, and just put some ideas in there. And if you take on a daily writing practice of some kind, whether it's just a simple, journaling, or if it's a gratitude journal, I don't care if it's your grocery list, tell the kids that you use writing every day, because really we do. But how can we show kids how to do that in ways that are interesting and creative? And that's where I just go to town when I do conferences and things. I do a regular session. I do actually full day and half day workshops on writing for teachers. But like one primarily, I get asked to do, what does writing look like for the year? Like, how can we plan that for the year? And then what does the writing block itself within a day look like? And those types of basic foundational things. But then my favorite is when I get to present about, like how to get kids to really get into the writing at a deeper level, and at a level where they're more concerned with trying to be original and trying to have a purpose for a certain audience, and sharing those types of techniques and getting into figurative language and just having fun. Like I said before, playing with words is, I think, more meaningful for the kids, and they look at writing in a whole new way.
I mean, that's pretty. I mean, the thing is, I know as a person who works in elementary, sometimes it is kind of hard, because some of it's just trying to get them to the point where they can essentially produce words. I mean, that's
right.
I know the thing, I'm a writer myself, so it's kind of hard. I always tell people I'm probably, even though I've become fairly skilled as a reading teacher, as a writing teacher, it's kind of hard because I don't want to judge them on like my standard of like how I look at myself as a writer. So I'm interested, how do you like teach kids to become better writers? Even though, I mean, in a sense, you're at a certain level, you've written books, you've been able to do all that. How are you able to teach kids to essentially become original, even though essentially they are kids? So how are you able to teach them to at least aspire to get to your level?
I think it's a mix of doing creative writing exercises that don't have like necessarily an end product, like it's focused on some kind of skill, like just working on strong verbs, for example. And when you can do a lesson that's just on alliteration, and all they're doing is writing tongue twisters that day for a small amount of time, and then sharing them and just playing around. And also, I feel like a really important part is having mentor texts that show those things that you're trying to share. And, even though we're trying to have kids produce original work, think about artists. They mimic and copy other masters, their types of art, and even maybe the same pictures, to learn the craft of painting or whatever their medium is. And so we can do that as writers too. And then as you start playing around with what the mentor texts have in them, or different skills that you're working on in your lessons during the day, the kids start to form their own kind of style, and they start to think out of the box a little bit. Like if you are working on narrative beginnings for a story, that's different than writing an opinion beginning piece or an informational beginning piece. So let's just say we're working on narrative beginnings. What I would do for that lesson is I would grab 20 books that have, like creative different ways of starting the story. And I would just read the first line of each of those books, and we would be charting, like, what did this author just use to welcome us into the story or to get us excited, and maybe it is a question, or maybe it is they use dialogue to get us right in, or maybe they describe the setting to get us, feeling like we're understanding the context of where these characters are, those kinds of things. And then I'm charting as we're reading each of those beginnings. And that's all I'm focused on is those beginnings. And through looking at mentor texts and what other people have done, then the kids can do, like either a combo of, I'm going to try a little onomatopoeia and this, question or whatever for my beginning. And so how can we take it and put a twist on it so it is our own? But I think before we can make something our own, we have to know what all is out there, what has been tried, and how can we do that in a new way.
I don't know, just listening to you, I could just tell you still have just raw passion. I mean, I'm only 6-7 years in, and people talk about how passionate I am, but I was like, man, 20 years now, I don't know where I'm gonna be at. I probably feel like I'm gonna be fairly passionate, but how are you able to maintain that same level of passion after all these years for education? I mean, because it does seem like some people get drained as the years go on. So how do you maintain that same level of passion?
Well, I do whole sessions on on figuring out your passion. And, I don't know if you've heard of ikigai. Have you heard of that Japanese term?
No.
Okay. So your ikigai is an intersection of what you love, something you're good at, something the world needs, and something you can be valued for. And if you can figure out that intersectionality where those four things come together in a giant Venn diagram, then you will find your purpose. And once you find your purpose, my goodness, there's nothing to hold you back, because then you know that you are on the path doing something that is, with your strengths. It's something you enjoy doing, and, the world needs it. I mean, goodness, we need big cheerleaders for kids to keep them excited about learning and growing and being creative, and then what the world can value you for. So in other words, hopefully there's some kind of, we have to pay the rent, we have to pay our house. And so something that you can be valued for, in the form of your job, And so when I left teaching, it wasn't because I was getting burnout in teaching. I absolutely love teaching. It was my heart. But we also, we get to do other things with our lives. We have this one wonderful life to live. And, we are multi-passionate people. And so I wanted to be able to explore another passion in a deeper way, but still get to do the things that are within my strengths and that I feel like I have something to offer. And I'm glad that it does show that I'm passionate, because I absolutely love what I'm doing. And I hope that kids feel that too, that energy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can tell. So it's just the energy, even in the background, be nothing but positive. I mean, that shows. So my next question kind of transition as we kind of get ready to close out is, you are going to be presenting at LitCon. Is this your first time presenting at LitCon?
It is my first time at LitCon. Yes. A lot of the conferences I do are either writing related, like SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, or since I was a gifted coordinator and very involved in the gifted education field and have my gifted license, I keynote for gifted conferences and do breakouts and things for those. So this is my first time at LitCon, but of course it's a great fit because literacy is so important, and I'm very excited about what I get to talk about there.
So what will you get a chance to talk about there? So I guess it'll be a chance to, promote that. Like,
Sure.
You don't want to give away everything, but what will you talk about?
Well, my session was originally titled 15 Ways to Spark a Love of Reading, but really I started getting carried away and it's way more than 15. So I'll be sharing the different things that I did in my classroom that were just decisions I made to again, try to bring reading as an authentic experience, not something that we read something and have to take a test on necessarily. And I'm not knocking AR schools. My school was an AR school, but I just want reading to be more than that for kids. If we want to develop lifelong readers, then we have to make sure that they are getting to read like real readers do. I mean, think about when you read something and you enjoy it, you want to read something else either by that same author, or you want to read something else in that topic or genre. And so I did a bold move several years ago and dumped all of my books that were leveled by AR level, and I instead leveled them according to what real readers would do. You know, when you go into a bookstore or a library, it's by topic, or there are special, you know, curated, you know, author, you know, tubs or shelves and things. And so that's what I did. And I feel like that made a difference. Doing book tastings at the beginning of the year where kids get to sit down and have tablecloths set out and they have a book wish list and they get to go through my classroom library tub by tub, and I ring a bell and then they go to the next tub and they get to see, you know, what kinds of books they might be interested in reading during the year. So those types of things. And then special reading events that you can have, projects you can have. I did an after school reading club that was super easy to put together, and kids loved it. Parents loved it because they got their reading time in for the night, and then, you know, no more reading homework to worry about. Just so many things that I feel like got kids excited about reading and wanting to do it on their own, not just for the sake of an assignment or because they had to read during self-selected reading time, but really getting them to where they are self-motivated.
When I guess making that connection, even when I was a kid, I was like, like necessarily I wanted to do it. So I can understand trying to get them motivated to do it. And I can tell just by the way you are, like I can see where the kids would want to do it. So talk to me about like what you hope now to do in the future. Now you are wearing multiple hats, whether it's author visits, keynote, and going to conferences. What do you hope to do in the future and possibly expanding?
Really, I'm doing it. Like I finally am doing the second part that I always wanted to do, where, you know, half of my time is spent going to schools in other states. I'm traveling all over and getting to go in and talk to teachers and talk to kids and write with kids. Some of the new things that I'm doing that I absolutely love, because you get a little bit of time to bond with kids. I had this project, which was a writing project that I absolutely loved. It was my culminating project of the year every year, where my students would write a story. So we would work through, you know, it might take a couple of months during writing time each day to write this story, from brainstorming all the way to the end, revision and editing and all of it. And I would send them off to be made into hardcover books for them. But I'd also send off their main character illustration to be made into a stuffed animal that was just like their drawing. So there's a company called Budsies that does these. And then I would buy a white dress and the kids would get to draw their characters on there. And the kids would I would buy in bulk a bunch of white t-shirts, and they would wear they would get to decorate a shirt to look like their characters and book. And we would have a huge publication party where the kids would get to, you know, have the parents come in. We'd have the books on display and their stuffed animals on display. And we would have book trailers that they created on iMovie that the parents would get to watch. And it was just a huge celebration of literacy, of writing. And I am now getting to do this with other schools. So I thought I, you know, had to say goodbye to that when I left teaching, but now I have schools asking me to come in as either an author in residence, where I can, you know, stay in that area for a while if it's somewhere far away. I've done it in person in my own town with homeschool groups. And then I also have a school that's just an hour away, and they're having me come once a week for 12 weeks to do this project with them. So the last time I went was last week, and I sent off their illustrations to be made into stuffed animals, and we're starting the beginnings of our stories next week, well, after break, when we return to school. But those kinds of projects are just so fulfilling to me, to have these kids see this, you know, seed that was in their mind becomes something tangible and real, and that they wrote this book and now their character is right here. Like it's this thing they can hold and that they'll get to share. I've done this project for so many years that I have gone to graduation open houses of my students, and they have these sitting out. It's a very special memory for these kids. So I'm very excited to get to do that with schools. And like I said, I love getting to talk to the teachers and the kids because, in both of those paths, I have a lot of passion for sharing things that I hope can be used in the classroom.
Now, as I was listening to you talking just throughout the whole interview, I know some of the teachers that may be watching, I know they're probably thinking like, oh, what about self-care? Because it seems like you do a lot, but it's like, hey, what about your family? What about this? So how do you balance that out? And then we can kind of close out. So how do you balance that?
Yeah.
The person?
Well, that is another thing that was a timing thing for me. So my oldest daughter is married and she's teaching first grade now. And so she's out of the house, and my other daughter is a senior in high school. So she will be, doing the college thing very soon too. So it was one of those things. I probably couldn't have done this and the amount of traveling that I'm doing if my kids were still young. So there is that for sure. And it really is all about, I'm so into listening to podcasts that are on, how to be productive, how to, make the most of your day, how to, keep your energy levels at healthy levels. And so I'm all about that. I'm actually working on a book about that for kids. But I think that was something that caused me in studying all of that and reading my own body to know, okay, something's got to go, either the full-time teaching or the book writing, because there's a lot more that goes into writing the book than just writing the story and sending it off to a publisher. There's so much more that you do in terms of editing, revision, marketing, all of that. And so to do a good job, I had to make a decision. And I think that's what a lot of teachers need to do. I went in cycles when I was a teacher, especially when my kids were younger, like, okay, so I am not going to spend the whole weekend at school planning. I'm going to, only do this much time, and then the rest is my family. And so you have to find that balance, and it's not always easy. I'm not going to pretend it is. There were a lot of years that it was, you felt like you're barely keeping your head above water, but understanding that powerful word, no, that, when someone asks you, my husband always used to say, if you take on something else on your plate, you have to take off something. And that was something that was, even though we all know that, for him to say it made me realize, yes, I do need to do that. And I would use that when people would ask me if I could do this committee, or if I could be on this thing, or do this other, be on this board. I finally had to say, you know what, I would absolutely love to do that. But if I do, I would have to give up this or this. And I'm really not ready to give up those two things yet. So, I'll let you know, if one of those two things goes by the wayside, I will contact you and maybe I can get involved at that point. So finding polite ways to let them know, that you're human and that it's not anything personal, but that you, in order to do your best and be your best, that you have to set yourself limits.
I think that's, a perfect answer as far as I was like, man, that's a lot of stuff. Because I already know most teachers read all the posts on social media, like, oh, it's all about self-care. You got to do this, you got to do that. And I was like, man, she does a lot. I'm sure somebody was like, man, how did she find the time for it? So, so I end with the same thing I end every interview with. What is the lesson that you would give to, and of course, everything's about the theme. What would be the lesson that you would give to any person who wants to become an educator?
To become an educator. So I actually do a talk for college kids that are seniors getting ready to go in. And I think part of it is the whole thing of, you don't have to do everything in that first year. Like when I do my talks with them, you can see their eyes just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Like, oh my goodness, how can I do all of those things? Yeah, they're all fun, awesome things, but how do you do all of it? It builds over years. And so you do what you can as you can. And then, the things that work, hold on to those and use them again. And then they're already planned out. And, the next year you can put that in without any extra planning. And the things that don't work, of course, you tweak and change them up for the next time. And as you go, that whole big writing project I talked to you about with writing the books and getting the stuffed animals made and getting the dress and the shirts and doing the book trailers, that didn't all happen in 1 year that I decided I'm going to do this thing and it's going to be this. Instead, it was I started doing the book. And that was it, several years, just the book. And then I found out about the company that did the stuffed animals. I figured out grants I could write to make that happen. And then I did that. And then it became, oh, it would be so much fun if we made book trailers to go with that. Oh, it would be so much fun if the next year I had the dress and the kids got to draw their characters on there and I could wear it to the publication party. And then the next year I had kids asking me, well, why do you get to wear something with characters and we don't? And so then I got the t-shirts. And so it was over years of doing it that I just kind of added to it. And that's kind of how we have to approach what we're doing. One thing that my daughter's school does that I love is they really do divide up the work and the planning. They meet together as a team and they each take a subject area and they take care of that, because there is so much that goes into planning and implementing. And that's just the basics. That's not accounting for all the things that happen and all the social and emotional needs that you need to take care of. And so if you can at least, share the burden of all of the planning and share ideas. Everyone has good ideas. They're all coming from different places, from different colleges, from different student teaching experiences, from, maybe they've even taught a couple years at another school. They have all those experiences to bring to the table to share. And then when everyone's sharing, well, this is what we could do for writing, you have all of these things that you're not reinventing the wheel. So I think that's one thing that, beginning teachers, they want to, of course, make a good impression and they want to improve themselves, but they have to be careful to make sure that, you do the best that you can. And every year you just keep improving, just like any of us. We're all just trying to be a little better than we were the day before.
You can't save the world. And I was a young teacher once, so I definitely understand that. You want to try all these things, but you don't realize like doing something different every week. It can be confusing to the students. It could be, and you end up all over the place instead of just picking one or two things and kind of making sure that's running perfectly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you for joining me. It was a pleasure, honestly, interviewing you and just listening to you talk about reading and writing and just your overall, just still having that passion for education, because it can be quite refreshing to listen to people who love this. So honestly, you don't always hear it, to be honest with you. So just being able to hear somebody just be full of passion for it, that was probably the most encouraging part of this interview. So I just want to thank everybody for listening. This is Mr. Short, or Jeremiah Short. This is another phenomenal conversation with Mr. Short. This was Shannon Anderson from Shannon is Teaching. Thank you for listening.